The click of her heels on the marble floor sounded like a death knell. Mason Sterling stared, his face ashen, as the woman he'd fired 8 months ago, the pregnant wife he'd replaced with his mistress, strolled past him and took the CEO's chair. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice ice, "you're in my seat. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of reclamation. He took her job, her home, and her dignity. He just didn't realize he'd also given her the one thing she needed to destroy him freedom." Vance and Sterling. Architecture wasn't just a firm. It was a statement. From their 60th floor office, overlooking the sprawling steel and glass heart of Chicago, Mason Sterling and Kristen Hayes Sterling were the city's golden couple. He was the brand, impossibly handsome, devastatingly charming, a master of the boardroom. She was the talent, the quiet, brilliant mind that had actually designed the award-winning Helios building, the project that put them on the global map. Kristen didn't mind, or so she told herself. She loved the work. She loved the man she thought he was. They had built this together from the ground up, starting in a cramped studio apartment with borrowed laptops. His name was on the door, but her soul was in the blueprints. Their new project, the Phoenix Tower, was to be her masterpiece. It was a revolutionary mixed-use skyscraper designed with a bioclimatic facade, a living building that would breathe with the city. It was her baby, and soon she would have another. She waited until a Tuesday evening. Mason was late as usual, but he'd walked in buzzing with energy, smelling of expensive whiskey and an unfamiliar, sharp perfume. "We killed it, Kristen," he said, throwing his $5,000 Tom Ford briefcase onto their pristine white sofa. "The city council is eating out of my hand. The Phoenix Tower is as good as greenlit." "That's amazing, Mason," she said, smoothing her hands over her stomach. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves. "I have some news, too." He was already at the bar, pouring another drink. "Oh, did you solve the tensile strength issue on the upper-level trusses?" "No." "Well, yes, I think so. But this is personal." He turned, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice small, almost a whisper. The silence in the room was absolute. The clinking of ice in his glass stopped. Mason's smile didn't just fade, it curdled. He slowly set the glass down. "Pregnant?" he repeated, not as a question, but as if tasting a foreign, bitter word. We're going to have a baby." She tried again, forcing a smile. "Kristen," he said, his voice dangerously low. "This is the worst possible time. The Phoenix Tower is a billion-dollar project. It requires 110% from both of us. You're the lead architect. You can't be compromised." "Compromised?" Her heart chilled. "Mason, it's a baby, not a terminal illness. I can still work. Women do it all the time." "Not on projects like this," he snapped. He ran a hand through his perfect hair. "This changes everything. This is a problem." Kristen felt the first tiny hairline crack form in the foundation of her perfect life. It was a terrifying, cold fissure. The problem, it turned out, had a name. Chloe Decker. She had started 3 weeks prior as Mason's new executive assistant hired, while Kristen was swamped with structural analysis. Chloe was all sharp angles, short skirts, and a predatory ambition that she masked with a sycophantic, "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you're a genius," demeanor. Kristen had disliked her instantly. Chloe wasn't an assistant. She was an opportunist. In the weeks following the pregnancy announcement, everything shifted. Mason was colder, more distant. He started holding executive-level meetings for the Phoenix Project without Kristin. When she protested, he'd pat her arm condescendingly. "Don't stress yourself out, darling. It's bad for the baby. Chloe is just taking notes for me. We're handling the boring client-side stuff, so you can focus on the pretty designs." "I handle the client side, Mason. I've always handled the client side. They're my designs." "And they're brilliant," he'd say, kissing her on the forehead, a gesture that suddenly felt cold and dismissive. "Now why don't you go home early? You look tired." Tired. It became his weapon. Kristin was suffering from first trimester morning sickness, but she never missed a deadline. Yet suddenly her work was sloppy. "There's a miscalculation in the HVAC load," Mason said one afternoon, loud enough for others in the open plan office to hear. Kristin's head shot up. "What? That's impossible. I ran the numbers 3 times. He tossed the file onto her desk. "Page 14, off by 8%. Chloe caught it." Kristin stared in disbelief. Chloe, who had a 2-year degree in business administration from a community college, had caught a mistake in her thermodynamics calculation. She opened the file. The number was wrong, but it wasn't the number she had submitted. Someone had changed it. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. Mason was already walking away, his hand resting just a little too long on the small of Chloe's back as he guided her toward his office. "Good catch, Chloe. You've got a real killer instinct. I like that." The crack widened. That night, Kristin couldn't sleep. The vague scent of that sharp perfume, a scent she now recognized as Chloe's, seemed to linger in their apartment even on Mason. She went into his study, a place she normally never entered. His briefcase was on the desk. She knew the combination. Inside, beneath a stack of contracts, was a small velvet jeweler's box from Cartier. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Maybe he's not angry about the baby. Maybe this is an apology. She opened it. Inside, nestled on white satin, was a Cartier love bracelet in rose gold. Kristin was allergic to rose gold. Mason knew that. She stared at it, the blood draining from her face. She heard his phone buzz on the desk. The screen lit up. A new text message. From Chloe. "He'll never love it as much as he loves me. You're the future. She's the past. Now get her out. I want that office." Kristin's breath hitched. The screen went dark, plunging the room and her world into blackness. She stood there frozen for a very long time, the only sound the frantic, silent screaming in her own head. The next 2 months were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Kristin, now 4 months pregnant and visibly showing, was systematically isolated. She was a ghost in the machine she had built. Mason and Chloe no longer bothered to hide their collaboration. They were a unit. Chloe was promoted to Junior Project Manager on the Phoenix Tower, a title that didn't exist until Mason invented it for her. Her real job, it seemed, was to be Mason's shadow and Kristin's tormentor. Chloe would accidentally delete shared files, forcing Kristin to redo hours of work. She would misplace client memos, making Kristin look unprepared for meetings, and Mason would stand by, a look of profound disappointment on his face. "Kristin, what's happening to you?" he'd say in their now separate bedrooms. "Your focus is gone. You're emotional. This condition has made you unreliable." "I am not unreliable, Mason," she would argue, her voice shaking with rage and exhaustion. "She is sabotaging me, and you are letting her—" "You sound paranoid, Kristin," he'd sigh, turning over. "It's the hormones. Get some rest. We have that big presentation with the board tomorrow." The presentation was Kristin's last stand. It was the final design approval for the Phoenix Tower. She had spent the last 72 hours fueled by desperation, triple-checking every number, securing every file on a private hard drive. She would expose Chloe, reclaim her project, and save her marriage and her company. She walked into the boardroom at 10 Hoseru a.m. Mason, Chloe, and the 4 members of the executive board were already seated. "Kristin, good of you to join us," Mason said, his voice clipped. "Let's begin," Kristin said, ignoring him. She plugged her drive into the projector. Nothing. The screen was black. "No compatible device found." "Having technical difficulties, Kristin?" Chloe asked, a saccharine smile on her face. Kristin's blood ran cold. She tried a different port. Nothing. My drive. "It's not. It's fine," Mason said smoothly, standing up. "Luckily, Chloe and I anticipated this. We have our own presentation." Chloe plugged in her laptop. The screen lit up. It was Kristin's presentation, her designs, her renderings, her calculations. But her name was nowhere. In the bottom right corner of every slide, it read, "Project Lead Mason Sterling. Project Manager Chloe Decker." Kristin sat mute as Mason proceeded to pitch her own work, her own words as his. He fumbled through the engineering data, and Chloe would helpfully interject. "What Mr. Sterling means to say is that the lateral load distribution is—" She was reading from a script Kristin had written. When it was over, the board applauded. "Brilliant, Mason, groundbreaking." Kristin finally found her voice. That is my work." The room went silent. "That is my design, my calculations. You stole it." Mason looked at her with a chilling theatrical pity. "Kristin, please, don't do this. You sabotaged my drive," she said, her voice rising. You stole my work." "Kristin," Mason said, his voice hardening into steel. "You're hysterical. You haven't contributed a viable idea in months. You've been complaining of fatigue of pregnancy brain. Chloe is the one who's been working 18-hour days with me to save this project. She salvaged this. You've become a liability." "A liability?" she whispered, the betrayal a physical blow. "I'm afraid so." He straightened his tie. "The board and I have discussed it. Your condition. It's clear your priorities have shifted. Vance and Sterling needs 100%. You can't give that. As of this moment, we are terminating your employment." The air left her lungs. You're firing me." "It's for the best," he said, not a flicker of emotion in his eyes. "For the company. And for you, you should be at home focusing on, motherhood." Chloe was visibly glowing, her eyes fixed on Mason in pure adoration. "Mason," Kristin said, her entire body shaking. "I'm your wife. I own half of this company." "Not anymore." He slid a thick document across the table. "Our prenup was very clear. The company was founded with my capital." He tapped the sterling in the company name. "You were a salaried employee, a very, very well-paid one. But an employee nonetheless, and now you're not." He was wrong. The initial capital, it hadn't all been his. But that was a secret she had kept for him. "And," he continued, "I've already filed for divorce. My lawyer will be in touch. I'm afraid our home is tied to the company's assets, so you'll need to vacate. Immediately." He was firing her, divorcing her, and making her homeless, in one 5-minute speech. "Security," Mason said, motioning to two guards who had appeared at the door. "Please escort Ms. Hayes from the premises. She's distraught." "Mason!" She shrieked a raw, primal sound of pain. "Don't make this ugly, Kristen," he said, turning his back to her. "It's just business." The guards took her arms. She was too stunned to fight. They walked her to her office, where a single, pathetic cardboard box sat on her desk. It contained a coffee mug, a framed photo of her and Mason taken in happier times, and a stapler. Chloe was already there, measuring the windows for new curtains. "I think gold," Chloe said to no one in particular. "A nice, bright, successful gold." Kristen was marched through the office, the stunned silence of her colleagues ringing in her ears. Her one friend, Sarah Jenkins, a junior architect, looked up, her face pale with horror. Kristen met her gaze, and in that second, Sarah understood. The elevator doors opened. Kristen was pushed inside. The doors closed, her reflection, showing a broken, pregnant woman clutching a box banished from the empire she had built. The rain was biblical. A sheet of cold, hard Chicago water that soaked Kristen to the bone in the 30 seconds it took her to stumble out of the lobby. She stood on the sidewalk, disoriented, the cardboard box in her arms already dissolving. Her phone buzzed, a text from her bank. "Your joint account has been frozen. All associated credit cards have been deactivated." He hadn't just fired her. He had cut her off. Completely. She was 5 months pregnant, jobless, homeless, and penniless, standing in a downpour. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just a breakup. It was an execution. She tried to hail a cab, hoping to beg the driver to take her to a hotel, any hotel. But she was just another weeping, disheveled woman in the rain. Cars splashed her as they passed. Defeated, she huddled under the awning of a closed coffee shop. Her body racked with sobs. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the grimy pavement, the world a grey, watery blur. She was there for an hour, invisible, until a tentative hand touched her shoulder. "Kristen." She looked up. It was Sarah Jenkins, her loyal friend from the office, holding an umbrella. Sarah's eyes were red. "He's a monster," Sarah whispered, pulling Kristen to her feet. "The whole office. No one can believe it. He's promoted Chloe to your job, lead architect. He's telling everyone she was the visionary for the Phoenix Tower all along. He took everything," Kristen choked out. "Not everything." Sarah said, her voice firm. "Come on, you're coming to my apartment." Sarah's tiny studio in Wicker Park became Kristen's sanctuary. For a week, Kristen did nothing but sleep and stare at the wall, existing in a fog of trauma. Sarah brought her food, tea, and prenatal vitamins, acting as a fierce protective guard dog, but Kristen knew she couldn't stay. She was a danger to Sarah. If Mason found out Sarah was helping her, he'd fire her without a second thought. "I have to go," Kristen said one night, her voice hoarse. "Where Kristen? You have nothing. He has the best lawyers in the state." "I have one call," Kristen said, a spark of something not hope but cold necessity igniting in her chest. One person he's terrified of. One person he knows he can't cheat. "Who?" "The Vance in Vance and Sterling," Kristen said. Sarah looked confused. "I thought that was just a name he made up, to sound old money." "It's real," Kristen said, her jaw tightening. "Julian Vance, my mother's estranged brother, my uncle." The story was a closely guarded secret. Mason had been a charismatic, ambitious, but broke architect when Kristen met him. Kristen's uncle, Julian Vance, was a reclusive, semi-retired billionaire investor. Julian had despised Mason on sight, calling him a hollow suit with a predator's smile. But Kristen had been in love. She had begged her uncle to fund their startup. Julian agreed, but on one ironclad condition. He would be a silent partner, holding 40% of the company stock, and more importantly, the primary note on the company's business debt. He'd structured it as a complex leverage agreement. Mason, in his arrogance, had seen it as free money. Kristen and Julian knew it was a leash. Kristen hadn't spoken to Julian in 3 years, not since she'd chosen Mason over her family's warnings. Swallowing her pride, which was all she had left, she used Sarah's phone to make the call. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Julian Vance. His voice was like dry ice. "Uncle Julian," she whispered. "It's Kristen." There was a long, heavy pause. "So," he said, the parasite finally bit the host. Kristen broke down the full story of the betrayal, the firing, the baby, the mistress pouring out of her in a torrent of shame and pain. When she was finished, the line was silent again. He told me I was a liability," she cried. "He said I was unfocused." "Good," Julian said. The word was sharp, clean. "Good." "What do you mean, good? He's underestimated you. He thinks you're a weepy, hormonal artist. He's forgotten that you are a Vance. My car will be outside your friend's apartment in 20 minutes. It's time to get to work." A black, silent Mercedes S-Class picked her up. It drove her not to an office, but to a 3-story penthouse on the Gold Coast, a sterile, museum-like apartment filled with modern art and overlooking the lake. Julian Vance was waiting for her. He was a tall, gaunt man in a perfectly tailored suit, with eyes that seemed to analyze everything down to the molecular level. He didn't hug her. He simply gestured to a chair at a massive glass table. "You're not homeless, Kristen. You're in a fortress, and you're not unemployed. You're my new chief analyst." "Analyst of what?" "Vance and Sterling," he said, sliding a laptop toward her. Mason was arrogant, but he was never smart. He's a salesman. You were the product. Now that the product is gone, he's going to get desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. He brought in a team, a forensic accountant named Michael and a cutthroat corporate lawyer named Annalise. For the next 4 months, Kristen's world shrank to this apartment. Her life became a stark, dual reality. By day, she was a mother-to-be. She did prenatal yoga, ate the healthy meals his private chef prepared, and watched her body change. But by night, she was a warrior. While Chicago slept, Julian and the team tore through the company's financials, which Julian had a legal right to access as a board member and primary creditor. At first, everything looked clean. Mason and Chloe were spending lavishly, a new corporate jet lease, a massive redecoration of the executive floor in tacky gold, just as Chloe had wanted, but it was all technically legal. "He's not stupid enough to just steal," Kristen said, frustrated, her hands on her swollen belly. "No," Julian said, his eyes scanning a balance sheet. "He's arrogant enough. Keep digging." Kristen gave birth in late November, a small, healthy girl with a shock of dark hair. She named her Lily. Holding her daughter for the first time, Kristen felt the last of her grief burn away, replaced by a cold, protective fire. This wasn't for her anymore. This was for Lily. This was for the future Mason had tried to steal from them. 2 weeks later, bleary-eyed from a 300 a.m. feeding, Kristen found it. It was an invoice, a $500,000 charge from a new vendor, Decker Designs, LLC. "Julian!" She called out, her voice sharp. He was beside her in an instant. "What is it? Decker Designs?" Kristen said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Registered 3 months ago, the same day Chloe was promoted." Michael, the accountant, did a quick search. "Address is a P.O. box in suburban Illinois. The sole proprietor is Jessica Decker." "Chloe's sister," Kristen breathed. "I remember her from an old Christmas party photo." They had found it. A shell company. Mason was billing his own firm for consulting fees, design services, and expedited materials, and paying the invoices to a company run by his mistress's sister. They weren't just stealing. They were siphoning. "How much?" Julian asked, his voice flat. Kristen's fingers moved. 1, 2, $3.4 million. In 3 months. "He's bleeding the company dry," Julian said. A slow, thin smile spread across his face. It was a terrifying sight. "He's just handed us the gun, Kristen." "What do we do?" Kristen asked. "Nothing," Julian said. "We let him. We wait for him to get sloppy. We wait until he's siphoned so much that he can't make payroll without defaulting on his loan. My loan." He looked at Kristen, his eyes proud for the first time. "He took your job. He took your home. He's about to pay for it, with his entire company." For the next 4 months, Mason and Chloe lived like royalty. They were the new it couple of Chicago's elite, featured in Modern Architecture and Chicago-style magazines. The articles were nauseating. They posed in Kristen's old office, Chloe draped over the desk, Mason with his hand on her waist, both credited as the twin visionaries behind the Phoenix Tower. They were celebrated arrogant and utterly blind. From her fortress penthouse, Kristen watched. She read the articles, she saw the photos, but she felt nothing. No jealousy, no pain. Only a cold, calculating patience. She and Julian's team tracked the Decker Designs invoices as they piled up. $3.4 million became $5 million, $5 million became $7 million. Mason was financing his new life by gutting his own company. He laid off 20% of the staff, mostly loyalists Kristen had hired, citing restructuring and streamlining. He cut corners on materials, swapping out the high-grade steel Kristen had specified for cheaper substandard alternatives. He was turning her masterpiece into a monument of his own greed. "He's going to destroy the firm before we can even take it," Kristen said, rocking Lily in her arms as she watched the data stream in. "He's destroying the name," Julian corrected. "The infrastructure, the client list, the talent. That's all still there, waiting. He's just clearing out the rot." The rot was spreading. Mason and Chloe, despite their media portrayal, were terrible at their jobs. Mason was a salesman, not a leader. Chloe was a manipulator, not an architect. They'd landed a huge new corporate campus project, Omnicorp, by underbidding the competition by a suicidal margin. He's promised them Kristen-level genius at a discount price. Julian analyzed, but he doesn't have Kristen. They were failing. Clients were complaining. Deadlines were missed. The Omnicorp project was a disaster, hemorrhaging money. The firm's cash flow, once a mighty river, was now a toxic trickle. And then came the quarterly payment, the massive balloon payment on the primary business loan, the one owed to Julian Vance. "He can't pay it," Michael the accountant said, a note of awe in his voice. "He's siphoned too much. The Omnicorp losses are killing him. He is $1.5 million short for the payment due next Monday." "He'll try to get an extension from the bank," Kristen said. "He will," Julian agreed, But the bank as of yesterday sold his debt. They were getting nervous about his volatility. They sold it to a more stable private investor. Kristin looked at him. You. Me, Julian confirmed. I am the bank. I am the creditor. I am the silent partner. And Mr. Sterling is about to be in default. Mason panicked. As Julian predicted, he spent 3 days frantically trying to secure a bridge loan. No one would touch him. His reputation for instability was finally catching up. On Friday, 2 days before the default, Mason called an emergency board meeting. It was a desperate last-ditch plea for the other board members to inject their personal cash to save the company. Julian Vance decided to attend. It was the first time he had set foot in the Vance and Sterling offices in a decade. His presence alone sent a shockwave through the boardroom. Mason and Chloe, who had never met him, looked at him with disdain. "Mr. Vance," Mason said with forced confidence. "A pleasure. We're just discussing a minor temporary cash flow issue." "Temporary?" Julian said, his voice quiet, drawing all the air from the room. "You call a $7 million fraudulent invoicing scheme temporary?" Chloe's face went white. Mason leaped to his feet. "That is a baseless allegation." "Is it?" Julian slid a folder thick with bank statements and invoices from Decker Designs, LLC, to the center of the table. "You have been defrauding this company, your partners, and your creditor. Me." The board members stared horrified. "And," Julian continued, "you are 48 hours from defaulting on the primary leverage agreement. An agreement which, if you'd ever bothered to read the fine print, contains a zero-tolerance default clause." Mason was sweating his tailored suit, suddenly looking cheap. What clause?" "The Vance clause, I call it," Julian said. "It states that in the event of a default or criminal malfeasance, I have the right to call the entire note due, immediately, or, as an alternative, to seize majority control of the company's assets and shares to satisfy the debt." You can't," Mason stammered. "I can," Julian said. "And I have. Gentlemen," he said to the board, "Vance and Sterling is insolvent. Mason Sterling has bankrupted you. I am offering you a choice. Fight me in court, and I will dismantle this firm for parts, and you will all be sued by your shareholders. Or you accept my new leadership structure. You vote to remove Mr. Sterling as CEO, and you appoint my chosen successor. In exchange, I will personally recapitalize the company and make all of you whole." It wasn't a choice. It was a surrender. "All in favor of removing Mason Sterling as CEO effective immediately," Julian said. Every hand on the board, save Mason's, went up. "It's done," Julian said, standing. "Who?" Chloe demanded, her voice a screech. "Who are you replacing him with?" Some suit from one of your other companies." Julian smiled, his cold, thin smile. "Oh no, Miss Decker, nothing like that." He walked to the door. "You'll meet her on Monday. An all-hands meeting is scheduled for 10:00 a.m. I do hope you'll both be there." He looked at Mason. "Though I suppose your attendance is no longer mandatory." The weekend was a blur of frenetic activity, but not for Kristin. While Julian's legal and security teams swept the Vance and Sterling offices, changing locks, securing servers, and placing discreet uniformed guards on the 60th floor, Kristin was at home. She spent Saturday in the park with Lily. She spent Sunday reading, preparing. She felt a profound, almost terrifying calm. It was the calm of a general on the morning of a battle she knew with absolute certainty she was going to win. She had spent 8 months in the shadows rebuilding herself from the inside out. The woman who had been kicked out into the rain was gone. that Kristen was a victim. The woman who looked in the mirror on Monday morning was a predator. She dressed with surgical precision. A custom-tailored suit by Tom Ford, the color of a midnight sky. Razor-sharp stiletto heels. Her hair, once soft and wavy, was pulled back into a severe, sleek ponytail. Her only jewelry was a pair of simple diamond stud earrings. She thought, like her uncle. She looked like a Vance. She kissed Lily's forehead. "Mummy has to go to work," she whispered. "I'm going to go. Take out the trash." At 9:45 a.m., the main atrium of Vance and Sterling was buzzing. An all-hands meeting on a Monday, called by the board, spelled one thing more: layoffs. The staff, or what was left of them, gathered in a state of anxious dread. In the front row, Mason and Chloe sat stubbornly defiant. Mason, though pale, had convinced himself this was just a power play by Vance. He thought he could spin it, rally the staff against this hostile takeover. Chloe was filing her nails, affecting an air of complete boredom. At 10:00 a.m., sharp Mr. Henderson, the eldest board member, walked to the podium, his face grim. "Good morning," he began, his voice shaky. "As some of you may know, this firm has faced significant financial challenges. Following a restructuring of our ownership, the board has voted to appoint a new chief executive officer, effective immediately." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. "Who is it?" someone shouted from the back. Mason stood up. "That's what we'd all like to know, Henderson. Who is this mystery person you and Julian Vance are trying to force on us? This firm works. We are leading. Mr. Sterling, you are no longer an employee here. Please sit down." "I will not," Mason yelled. "This is my company." Click, click, click. A new sound cut through the tension. It was the rhythmic, sharp sound of heels on the marble floor. It was coming from the main elevator bank. The sound grew louder, echoing in the cavernous space. Every head turned. The crowd parted instinctively, a wave of shock and disbelief rippling through them. Kristen Hayes walked through the atrium. She was not the weeping, pregnant, broken woman they remembered. This was a different person. She was power. She was ice. She was control. Her eyes were fixed forward, ignoring the gasps, the whispers, the stunned, open-mouthed stares. Sarah Jenkins, standing in the back, was crying, but this time she was smiling. Kristen didn't stop, didn't slow. She walked directly to the front. Chloe Decker dropped her nail file, a metallic clatter in the dead silence. Mason Sterling's face was a mask of utter, complete shock. His skin went from red to a sickly, mottled white. "Kristen," he breathed as if he'd seen a ghost. Kristen stopped at the podium. She looked at Mason. Her gaze so cold, it was a physical force. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. "You're in my light, Mason." She turned to Mr. Henderson, who nodded and stepped away from the microphone. She turned back to her former husband. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone, clear and cutting as a diamond. "You're in my seat." She didn't wait for him to move. She walked past him up the few steps to the executive platform, where the CEO's chair sat empty. She didn't just sit in it. She took it. She crossed her legs, picked up the microphone from the podium, and looked out at the sea of faces, her employees. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice risen references in a way that felt like a caress and a threat. "As Mr. Henderson was saying, I am the new chief executive officer of this firm." She let that sink in. "I know. There have been rumors, uncertainty, layoffs. I am here to tell you the instability stops today." Her eyes found Chloe and Mason, who were frozen, staring at her, their minds unable to process the reality of what was happening. "There will be some further restructuring, effective immediately." She looked at Mason. "Mason, Chloe, my office, now." She stood. "And Mr. Sterling," she added as an afterthought. "Bring your key card and your company credit card. I believe you have one of mine." She turned and walked without a backward glance toward the executive suite, the click, click, click of her heels, the only sound in a world that had just been turned upside down. The walk to the CEO's office, her office, was the longest of Mason's life. He and Chloe followed Kristen in a silent, horrified daze, like prisoners being led to their own execution. The entire company watched them go. Kristen swept into the office. It was exactly as she'd imagined, gaudy, loud, and cheap. The rich mahogany she had loved was gone, replaced with white lacquer. The elegant minimalist furniture was replaced with gold and black monstrosities. She didn't sit. She stood behind the massive desk, which was a monument to bad taste. 2 other people were already in the room, standing by the window. Kristen gestured to them. "Mason Sterling, Chloe Decker. I'd like to introduce you to Annalise Sharma from the District Attorney's Office. And this is Michael Wu, our new Chief Financial Officer and Head of Forensic Accounting. He's been very busy." Mason's blood turned to ice. "DA's office, Kristen. This is insane. This is a corporate dispute." "No, Mason," Kristen said, her voice quiet. "This is a crime scene." She picked up a single bound report from the desk. "Let's start small," she said, almost casually. "Chloe, let's talk about Decker Designs, LLC, a shell company registered to your sister, Jessica, a company that has billed Vance and Sterling for $7.2 million in consulting fees over the last 8 months. Chloe, who had been trying to project an air of defiance, crumpled. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Kristen slid a bank statement across the desk. "This is a wire transfer for $250,000 from Decker Designs to a personal account in your name for the down payment on your new condo, the one Mason bought you." She looked at Annalise. "I believe that's called wire fraud and money laundering." Chloe let out a small, strangled squeak and fainted, collapsing onto the hideous, gold-flecked carpet. Neither Kristen nor Mason even looked down at her. "She's weak," Mason sneered, trying to find his footing. "This was all her idea. She's manipulative. Kristen, darling, you know what she's like. She preyed on me. We can fix this. You and me. Like old times." He took a step toward the desk, his voice dropping to the seductive, conspiratorial tone that had once worked on her. "Get her out," Kristen said to the 2 security guards now standing at the door. They hauled Chloe's unconscious form out of the room like a sack of potatoes. "And send in a paramedic. I want her conscious when she's arrested." "Arrested?" Mason bellowed. "Oh, you're not getting off that easy, Mason," Kristen said. "The fraud. That's just the appetizer." She held up a second, much thicker document. This is the real problem. This is the structural prospectus for the Phoenix Tower, the one you and Chloe submitted to the city after you fired me." "It's a masterpiece," Mason blustered. "The city loved it." "They did, except for one thing." Kristen's eyes narrowed to slits. "You kept my design, but to cover the millions you were stealing, you cut corners. You swapped out the T1 grade steel I specified for the central load-bearing columns. You replaced it with cheaper, substandard T3 steel from an unaccredited supplier. It's a standard cost-saving measure, he protested. It's not, Kristen said, her voice a lethal whisper. Not in my design. I ran the numbers this weekend. My original design had a 2.5 safety redundancy. Your design has a 0.8 redundancy. Mason didn't understand. So what? It's a little less. It means, Kristen said, in a high-wind event, which Chicago gets twice a year, the building would experience catastrophic structural failure. You didn't just cut a corner, Mason. You built $1 billion death trap. You endangered the lives of thousands of people. She tossed the file on the desk. This isn't just fraud. This is conspiracy to commit public endangerment. This is criminal negligence. This is the kind of thing that sends men like you to prison for a very, very long time. Mason's face, his charm, his arrogance, it all just dissolved. In his place was a terrified, small, hollow man. He finally understood. He wasn't just fired. He wasn't just broke. He was over. Kristen, please, he whispered, his hands visibly shaking. She's my... We were... Please. Kristen looked at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing. Just an empty, cold space where her love for him used to be. You fired me, she said, her voice flat. You fired your pregnant wife to please your mistress. You stole my work, you stole my home, and you tried to steal my future. You left me on a sidewalk in the rain with nothing. She leaned forward. This isn't a please situation, Mason. This is a consequences situation. She pressed a button on her desk. Security. The two guards entered again. Mr. Sterling's employment here is terminated, she said. Please escort him from the building. Annalise, she said to the DA representative, he's all yours. Kristen, he screamed as the guards took his arms. You can't do this. I'm Mason Sterling. I am this company. No, Kristen said, walking to the window, looking out over the city that was hers. You were just the man who married the company. And the Vance in Vance and Sterling, well, she's a very vengeful woman. Mason was dragged out, shouting and sputtering his rein over. Kristen stood at the window, took a deep breath, and allowed herself one small, tight smile. The trash was out. The heavy oak door of the CEO's office clicked shut, and the sound echoed with a profound finality. The shouting, the sirens, the entire chaotic symphony of Mason's downfall faded, leaving Kristen in a sudden, jarring silence. She was alone. She was standing in the center of the room that had once been her creative sanctuary, now defiled by Chloe's gaudy, triumphant gold and lacquer. For a full minute, she didn't move. She just breathed. She smelled the lingering trace of Chloe's sharp perfume and the faint, acrid scent of Mason's fear. She walked not to the desk, but to the window, placing her palms flat against the cool glass, looking down 60 stories at the city that had nearly broken her. The city she had just reclaimed. She had left this building 8 months ago, penniless, pregnant and invisible. Now she was its master. The feeling was not triumph, not joy. It was a cold, heavy and absolute sense of rightness. Her gaze drifted to the desk. She walked over her fingers, tracing the edge of the tasteless white lacquer. On the corner sat a framed photo. It was Mason and Chloe at a recent architectural gala, the one where they had accepted an award for her Phoenix Tower concept. He was beaming, his arm locked around her waist. Chloe was looking at him, her expression a venomous mix of adoration and possession. Kristen picked up the frame, her expression unreadable. She looked at the woman who had tried to steal her life and the man who had let her. She felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Just pity. They were so small. She turned to the sleek gold-plated intercom on the desk, another of Chloe's additions, and pressed the button for her new assistant. "Michael," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Yes, Ms. Hayes." His voice came back crisp. "Have the maintenance supervisor in my office in 30 minutes. I want this entire suite stripped to the studs. Every piece of furniture, every light fixture, every single thread of this god-awful carpet. I want it gone by morning." "Ma'am, gone where?" Kristin looked at the photo of Mason and Chloe, then dropped it glass first into the metal trash bin. "Burn it. I don't care. I want my old office back. The mahogany, the glass, everything." "Yes, Ms. Hayes." "And Michael," she added, her voice softening just a fraction. "Find Sarah Jenkins. She's in junior design. Tell her I need to see her. Right away." "One more thing," Kristin said. "Find out what her current salary is, and then I want you to double it. I don't care what it is. Double it." She cut the connection before he could reply. She was not just cleaning house. She was rebuilding her foundation, and Sarah had been the only one to offer her shelter in the storm. Loyalty, Kristin now knew, was the only currency that truly mattered. She walked out of the office, leaving the opulent ruin behind without a backward glance. The entire company was still gathered in the atrium, standing in stunned, silent clusters. When they saw her emerge, a new wave of hushed terror rippled through them. They had just watched one CEO dragged away in handcuffs. They had no reason to believe his replacement wouldn't be another kind of tyrant. They looked at her as if she were a beautiful, terrifying executioner. She walked to the podium, the click, click, click of her heels the only sound in the vast marble hall. She saw the faces. Fear, exhaustion, desperation. She saw Sarah Jenkins near the front, her hands pressed to her mouth, looking as if she might faint from a combination of shock and hope. Kristin took the microphone. She let the silence stretch, forcing them to look at her, to see the woman she had become. "My name," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet power that needed no volume, "is Kristin Hayes. Most of you knew me as Kristin Sterling. That part of my life, is over." She paused. "And the woman I was then, she's over too." She scanned their faces. "I know what you're thinking. You're scared. You've just traded one regime for another. You've spent the last 8 months living in fear. Fear of layoffs. Fear of speaking up. Fear that your hard work was being credited to someone else." A few bitter, knowing glances were exchanged. "The instability stops today," she said, her voice a firm, unwavering line. "The leadership that valued backstabbing over talent, that valued image over integrity, is gone." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Mason Sterling and Chloe Decker have been stealing from this company. From all of you." This time the gasps were sharp, angry. A few people muttered, "We knew it." "As of this morning," Kristin continued, "they are in the custody of the Chicago DA's office. They will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Their reign is over." A hesitant, scattered applause started, then died, replaced by the more pressing fear. "What about us?" Kristin's expression softened just slightly. "This firm," she said, her voice rising with a passion she had held back for nearly a year, "was not built on fraud. It was built on a foundation of innovation, of brilliance. I designed the Helios building." Her voice was steel. "I designed the real Phoenix Tower. and I am taking my company back." Her eyes found the faces of those she knew had been wronged. "I see faces missing, faces I hired. David from structural, Maria from drafting, Robert from acquisitions, all of you who were terminated in the last 8 months. Consider this your formal offer to return, effective immediately, with full back pay for the time you were gone, and a 10% raise on your former salary." It was a shock wave. A woman in the back burst into tears. David, who had apparently come to watch the all-hands meeting from the lobby, was staring his jaw slack. "And for those of you who stayed," Kristin continued, her voice ringing out, "for those of you who weathered this, who kept your heads down and did the work, your loyalty will be rewarded. The era of fear is over. The era of integrity begins now." The atrium exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar. It was the sound of a company-wide exhale, a release of 8 months of pressure and toxicity. People were cheering, crying, hugging each other. It was a liberation. Sarah Jenkins was at the front, sobbing openly, laughing through her tears. Kristin met her gaze and gave a single, firm nod. "We did it." "This won't be easy," Kristin called out over the beautiful, chaotic noise. "We have to save the Phoenix project. We have to call every client and tell them the truth. We have to rebuild our reputation from the ground up. It will be the hardest work we have ever done. But we will do it together. And we will do it with integrity." She raised her hand. "Welcome back." She finished, her voice thick with emotion for the first time. "To Vance and Sterling. The real Vance and Sterling." The next year was a brutal, relentless, and glorious campaign. Kristin with Julian's capital, and Sarah, now her fiercely competent COO at her side, was a whirlwind. She worked with a surgical focus fueled by coffee and a protective fire. Her first act was to have her old office restored, but with one change: an adjoining soundproofed nursery. Lily was a constant presence, a visible statement that this company would no longer force women to choose. Kristin would be a CEO, and she would be a mother, and the company would bend to her, not the other way around. In the bottom drawer of her restored mahogany desk, she kept the cheap dissolving cardboard box from that day. She looked at it whenever she felt tired. It was not a reminder of her humiliation. It was a reminder of her naivete. It was a reminder of what happened when she was quiet, when she was accommodating, and when she let her name be second to anyone's. She was ruthless in her honesty. Her first call was to the Omnicorp board, the project Mason and Chloe had been hemorrhaging money on. She walked into their boardroom, presented Julian's forensic audit, and told them the unvarnished truth. "I cannot save the budget your former CEO promised you," she said, "because that budget was a lie. What I can do is save the building. I can give you a landmark built with integrity." They were stunned, but they stayed. Radical honesty, she learned, was a powerful weapon. She halted construction on the Phoenix Tower, a move that cost the firm millions and nearly gave the board apoplexy. "We will not be the firm that builds monuments on a lie," she told them with Julian's proxy vote in her pocket. She personally oversaw the removal of the substandard steel, re-engineered the flawed supports, and rebuilt her masterpiece beam by beam the right way. 1 year to the day after her return, Kristin Hayes stood on the observation deck of the newly opened Phoenix Tower. The grand opening gala was thundering with music and applause 60 floors below. She had slipped away. The building was a triumph. Critics were calling it a masterpiece of resilience and light. "It's beautiful, Kristin." She turned. Julian Vance was standing there, a rare, proud smile on his face. He held his grandniece Lily's hand. "They're calling it your comeback," he said. "It's not a comeback," Kristen said, taking Lily from him. She held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "It's a correction." "He took the plea," Julian said quietly, joining her at the glass. "He'll be out in 8 years with good behavior." Kristen looked down at the city lights, her expression unbothered. 8 years. It feels small, irrelevant. And Chloe testified against him to save herself, Kristen said, shrugging. "Got 2 years probation and a fine she'll be paying off for the rest of her life. Last I heard, she's a receptionist at a dental office in suburban Indiana." She looked at Julian. "She's just gone. A ghost." "And you, Kristen?" Julian asked, his voice gentle. "After all this, the betrayal, the fight, the cost, are you happy?" Kristen was quiet for a long time. She looked at her reflection in the glass, a woman, a mother, a CEO with an entire city at her feet. She thought of the word happy. It was the word she'd used to describe her old life. A passive, fragile, and ultimately illusory state. "Happy," she said, "is the wrong word, Uncle." She turned from the reflection to the reality of the skyline. "Happy is what I thought I wanted. It's a feeling. It comes and goes. What I feel now is solid. It's a foundation." She kissed Lily's forehead, her daughter's warmth a stark contrast to the cold glass. "He fired me because he thought a baby made me weak. He thought I was a liability. He built his new life on a foundation of lies and cheap steel." She gestured to the incredible structure around them, a building that was breathing with the city, strong and true. "I built this on integrity, on truth, and on the best damn engineering in this country." She looked at Julian, a small, genuine smile finally touching her lips. A smile of total, absolute control. "So no, I'm not happy. I'm in charge." Kristen proved that the best revenge isn't just living well, it's taking back everything. Her story is a powerful reminder that your darkest moment, the moment you are left on the sidewalk in the rain, can be the spark for your greatest comeback. They tried to bury her, but they didn't know she was a seed. What did you think of Mason's downfall? Was Chloe's fate justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama and incredible comeback stories every week. Click the bell so you never miss an update from us. Thanks for watching.